Hi everyone, this is Professor Benjamin, and you have made it through week one of this course. So this week in this course we had just the introduction post and response post due by Thursday, and that's because this course started on Tuesday. You also have a quiz due by Sunday 11:59 on the chapter one of the textbook. So I want to couple things. Number one, the quizzes each week only have to do with the textbook chapter reading, so they don't have to do with the additional articles or anything. So they're specifically related to the textbook chapter reading. So it's absolutely essential that you have the textbook. If you don't have the textbook yet this semester because of a book issue or I don't know, whatever other issue there is, you can always use the PowerPoint. And of course, if you open this PowerPoint and actually download it, so if you go here and download the PowerPoint, I explained this in the video on the home page, but if you open this actually in PowerPoint, at the end of each slide is our notes. So if you're in here and you actually say slideshow, view show from beginning, current slide, you'll actually see, you'll see that at the end of each slide there are actually notes for each of the slide. So if you don't have the textbook yet, that will be able to help you through the first quiz. In the future, it's absolutely essential that you have the textbook because the quizzes that are due at the end of each session, except for session 2 and 5, are related to the textbook chapter reading. So from this point, for chapter 2, for week 2, 3, 4, and 5 of this course, you have two things due, you have two posts due each week. So there's a lot of planning that you have to do, and the reason for that is, remember, this is a 10-week course, not a 15-week course. So 10 weeks of material in you were covering 15 weeks of material in 10 weeks. So there's a couple weeks where I have to double up on information so we can catch up to what traditionally would be a 15-week semester. So the first couple weeks of this course are pretty intense, and then after that it kind of evens off. So I want to make you aware of that situation. So this week right here we had the introduction forum and we have a quiz due by Sunday 11:59. Now next week we're going to cover Tragedy of the Commons and session 3, which is ethics, economics, and policy. So due by Tuesday 11:59, you have an initial post due for Tragedy of the Commons, and you also have an initial post due for ethics, economics, and policy. So by Tuesday, you have an initial post due here and here. Again, I know the due date says Thursday, but the initial post portion is due by Tuesday. The response to a fellow classmate for session 2 is due by Thursday, and session 3 is due by Thursday. So you actually have 4 things due for me before Thursday next week. You have 2 initial posts due and 2 response posts, 1 for each session, and you have a quiz due by February 24th on ethics, economics, and policy. I know it's a lot because you have the readings due, but unfortunately we have to catch up to what technically would be a 15-week course, okay? And don't forget, we have like spring break, so we have to catch up on all of this information. So this week, we're going to deal with Tragedy of Commons coming up. This is really important that you read this PowerPoint and that you, of course, read these additional articles, especially this article. This article talks about the commons problem. Commons are a shared space. That means all the air we breathe, all the land, all the oceans, but it can be that large, but it could also be small, which is, you know, we share public parks, we share classrooms at CCP, we share those with other classes, we share them with the public, and so Garrett Hardin talks about in this article the fact that there have been solutions that have been put into place to try and stop us from harming these common areas. And in his article, he specifically, of course, talks about population. But if you take out the population situation and say, how do we deal with pollution? And it gives you solutions that we've put into place, such as privatization. He talks about privatization of public parks. He talks about pollution. What have we done? We've set fines in place, which is mutual corrosion. He also talks about a welfare state where we've put into place where we help people by giving them subsidies, right? And he talks about that these are technical solutions, but they always have problems associated with them because they do not have a moral component. And that moral component is education. So he says these technical solutions also need a moral component. If not, people aren't going to change their behaviors. So while the technical solution masks the problem and it sort of stops people from abusing them, it doesn't always stop everybody totally. And so this article is really a great article to read. He talks about that pasture problem, which is that people have this inherent need for their short-term gain. So I'm going to look to pollute the air because it's the best for me, but it's not the best for society. Or I'm going to look at what I can do to pollute the water because it's best for me, but I'm not going to think about everyone who's drinking that water. And so that article is really important. This article's talk about invasive species and how invasive species are considered tragedy of the commons, and the reason is we look for our short-term gain, which is, I think this plant is really pretty, I'm going to bring it into this country, or I think these red-eared sliders are adorable, which are turtles, and I'm going to bring them in, but I don't realize that they're going to ruin the habitat of another organism. And that's just because we have this inherent need just looking out for ourselves rather than the whole in society. And the reason, and Hardin says this in the article, is I get a +1. So I actually get a positive gain, okay? And what happens is that the negatives are shared by everyone, so we don't see them as much. And so we only look at the fact that I get more out of it than what everybody else shares. And that is the big problem with tragedy of the commons, okay? So you'll read about all this kind of stuff, and you'll read about the Gulf oil disaster is the idea of that technical solution with privatization, but it comes at costs, which is we privatize our oceans and we lease them out to all these oil companies, but they're just looking for their inherent need, and they're not thinking about the rest of society. And, you know, the BP oil spill was a massive oil spill that still today, people along the Gulf Coast are feeling. Fishermen are still feeling that today, the destruction of the ecosystem in that area. Okay, and then the second thing that we're going to cover next week is ethics, economics, and policy. Now there's a chapter in the textbook that associates with this. Chapter 2 of the textbook deals with this entire session, so you're going to want to read that. Pricing the Priceless article talks about the idea that we try and put a price tag on nature. While we can't technically do it, we can. It's just not an accurate price. So this article talks about that, as well as your textbook talks about hedonic valuation, contingent valuation, ecological valuation. Both of these articles talk about how we can use cap and trade to put in economic value on the environment. So these are important to read. And then this session in the textbook also talks about intrinsic and instrumental value, which is the fact that we look at nature only for its instruments that it provides us, which is, you know, trees provide us with something, or should nature have it? Should we look at nature as having value unto itself? So really important. And we also talk about environmental injustice, which is the fact that we exclude people in the environment, or people are pushed into specific environments because of injustices. And a lot of times people are we use the environmental injustice excuse me. We do that because people, lack of income of people, lack of education, a lot of times gender inequality, all of these things play a role in that. So this week coming up, we have a big week, and we have this for about 2 or 3 more weeks, and then we settle down. So if you can put a lot of effort into the next 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to reap the rewards of that. Okay, so it's absolutely essential that you do that. So this week coming up, we have an initial post for Tragedy of the Commons and an initial post for ethics, economics, and policy due by Tuesday. We have a response post for Tragedy of the Commons and for ethics and economics by Thursday of next week. And then you also have a quiz due by next Sunday, 11:59. Okay, don't forget this week we still have a quiz due by Sunday 11:59 that deals with the chapter in the textbook, and next week you only have one quiz because Tragedy of the Commons does not have a specific chapter in the textbooks that's related to it. Okay, so Good luck this week. Also, just a couple quick housekeeping items. Initial posts need to be at least 300 words. They should include paragraphs. They should include in-text citations showing me where the sources that I have given you are used in the post. And response posts to your fellow classmates are at least 200 words, and bring a good conversation to the table. They're not just saying, hey, love your post. They're bringing some sort of really good feedback, why you agree, why you disagree, and including factual basis as to why. Also, remember, there's no I statements in initial posts in this class. There's never I feel or in my opinion or I believe, and that's because this is a science class, so it's more factually based. Okay? If you have, of course, questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I look forward to your posts this week.